In this video, I'm going to walk you through 6 conversations. These are the same 6 conversations I have with every client who comes to me at age 60 with $2 million or more. And it doesn't matter how different they look on paper. The 6 conversations I have, they just never change. 30 years of these meetings and everyone walks in with the same question. Am I going to be okay? That's it. That's all they ask. Is me and my family going to be okay? And they've usually spent years online collecting answers that don't agree with each other. They don't need more information. They need advice on the few things that actually matter in plain English, and they need it in the right order. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to walk you through all 6 the same way I would if you were sitting in my office. No filler, no jargon. So you can hear at age 60 what most people don't figure out until it's too late. So let's get right into it. So there's 2 men, and they walked into my office about a year apart. They were both around 60. Both had built almost exactly the same amount. They had a little over $2 million. One of them was sure, he was convinced he was behind. He was convinced he had to work 4 more years before he could even think about stopping. And the other one was completely relaxed. He was fine. He checked every box. He hit every benchmark. He felt like he was ready. And by the end of this video, I'll tell you how it actually turned out for both of them. Because the one who was scared had almost nothing to worry about. And the one who was relaxed was sitting on a 6-figure problem that no one had actually found. Same $2 million, 2 completely different outcomes. Now, every one of these meetings starts the same way. A family sits down and the first thing out of their mouth is some version, are we going to be okay? Not, are we rich? Not, can we buy a boat? Just, am I going to be okay? And I get it, of course. Everything you read online is built around some giant number designed to get a click. 10 million, 12 million, 20 million. Numbers that make a family with 2 million feel behind when they're actually in great shape. So the first thing I do before we talk about a single investment or a single tax idea is show them the actual data on where they stand. And when they see that, it makes them feel better every single time. Because here's the number that most people have never seen. According to the Federal Reserve's own survey, only about 1.8% of American households have $2 million in their retirement accounts. That's 1.8%. And the family right in the middle of America, at that 50% margin, has around $200,000. So 2 million isn't a little more than the middle. It's roughly 10 times what the middle has. And that's before Social Security even starts. A couple who both earned well, claiming at their normal retirement age, can bring in somewhere around $6,000 to $8,000 a month for life, adjusted for inflation, before we touch $1 of the 2 million. Most people have never put that Federal Reserve info and the Social Security info side by side. And when I do it for them, you can almost see the relief. They know they're going to have enough money, because a scared person makes bad decisions with their money, but someone who's calm, they almost always make good ones. But either way, the first meeting, that first conversation, produces one thing. It gives them an accurate picture, and everything else is built on top of that picture. My name is Chris McClure, and I've been a financial advisor for 31 years now, and I put these videos together about once a week. Hopefully, it's honest information for high net worth families who have worked too hard to leave money on the table. So back to that idea of an accurate picture. An accurate picture tells you where you stand. What you do next is the part most people at 60 get wrong, and it could be worth a lot of money in retirement. You see, there's this stretch of years, roughly from age 60 to 65, between your last paycheck and the day Social Security and required withdrawals kick in. I call it the tax window. And it's the single most valuable planning stretch of your whole life. Because in those years, for maybe the first time ever, you actually control your own income. You decide how much shows up on your tax return, and that control is worth real money in retirement. So let me show you with the first of these 2 men. Frank ran a regional air conditioning distribution business for about 30 years. And he walked in, like I said, at age 61 with about 2.3 million, and he was certain he needed 4 more years. His plan was very similar to the ones I see all the time. They come in with, they're going to keep working, they're going to claim Social Security the day they stop working, and pull from the 401k as they need. And that plan, if Frank had done it, would cost him a small fortune, not because it was reckless, because it wasted the tax window. See, watch what the tax window makes possible. If Frank stops at 61 and he stops working and he lives on portfolio withdrawals for a few years before turning on Social Security, his taxable income drops to almost nothing, lower than it's been since he was a young man, since he was a kid with a paper route. And that low income stretches when you do Roth conversions. Frank had close to about $1 million in traditional 401k and IRA. And that was money that had grown for 30 years without ever being taxed. You see, that's the catch. None of it had been taxed yet. And every dollar he pulls out of retirement, it gets taxed as ordinary income. And at 73, in his situation, the government would force him to pull it out, whether he needs it or not. That would push him into a higher tax bracket even while he was working. And so a Roth conversion allowed Frank to move money out of that traditional account before all that happens. He pays the tax on it now on purpose. He decides to pay the tax and he puts it into a Roth. And once it's in the Roth, it's done. It grows tax-free for the rest of his life. He never owes another dime on it, and there's no forced withdrawals. And oh, by the way, his kids inherit that money tax-free too. So those low income years from 60 to 65 is what makes this whole idea cheap. He's not gonna have to pay a ton of tax on the conversion. Frank can convert a chunk of that money and pay tax at just a 10, maybe 12% bracket. It's the lowest he'll ever see. If you wait until 67 with Social Security and then also required withdrawals running at the same time, conversion can get taxed as high as 22, 24% or even more. Same move, but nearly double the tax. And for his family, doing it deliberately across the tax window added up to be more than 6 figures difference in lifetime taxes. So Frank didn't need 4 more years of work. He needed to stop and spend those same 4 years doing conversions while his income was low instead of working. Keeping his income high and slamming the tax window shut would have been a bad idea. And once he saw that, the whole picture changed for him. And I'll come back to what we actually did in a moment. And the exact years that are your biggest opportunity in that tax window are also when the single most dangerous risk in retirement can hit you, unfortunately. And this risk, it worries me more than any market crash. You see, 2 people can earn the exact same average return over 30 years and end up with completely different retirements. Same average, different lives. The only thing that changed was the order that the good years and the bad years came in. It's called sequence risk. But forget that name. While you're still working, a bad market year barely touches you, right? You're buying cheaper and it recovers. The day you retire and you start pulling money out, it flips. If bad years hit early, you're selling shares, you're selling investments to buy groceries at the bottom. And those shares aren't there to recover when the market comes back. The hole that you're digging by selling those shares gets deeper every single year. If you put Frank back in the picture, he walked in with a portfolio built like a 40-year-old, right? He had nearly all growth. He had high tech stocks. He had S&P 500 funds. And so he had a pretty aggressive portfolio because for 30 years, being aggressive in his situation was exactly right. His accounts did really well. And when I told him that the thing that got him here was about to become the thing that could unwind his entire retirement. See, a bad few years in his first decade of retirement and if his money was still all in growth and money was coming out every month, that 2.3 million could bleed down to something that scared him. Maybe it goes down to $1.5 million or $1 million. Same portfolio, just unlucky timing. See, that's a hard reality for him because he had done everything right. And it's true no matter the number, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, it doesn't exempt you from the markets. If you invest it wrong on the day you retire, it's really a coin flip on when the next bad market shows up. And the funny thing is the fix isn't a stock tip or a tax idea or a better investment. It's just that before you retire, you carve out a protected layer, a few years of spending money that the market can't touch. So when the drop comes, and it always does, nothing forces you to sell. You don't have to spend your retirement money on groceries. The growth money stays. You see, a 30-year retirement still needs decades of compounding. It still needs to grow. It just stops being where your next month's groceries come from. You see, that one change is what lets that portfolio recover from a bad year instead of getting wrecked by one. And the funny thing is you build it during that same tax window we talked about earlier, while you're still working, because setting it up mid-crash is expensive, it's stressful, and most oftentimes it's too late. So Frank had the window to build it. The question was whether he'd use it or work 4 more years and walk straight into the danger anyway. So let me pause for a second. If you're around 60 with a portfolio like this, and nobody's kind of walked you through these 3 conversations for your specific numbers, Click the link below to book a call. My team and I do this every day, and the earlier we start, the more of that window we get to use. And the fourth conversation, it's the one that surprises people the most. It's the one that makes people tilt their head a little. You see, I sit down with a lifelong saver and I tell them they need to practice spending money. Wait, spending money? They look at me like I'm crazy, that I've lost it. You take Frank, for example. He's a guy who built 2.3 million by being careful for 30 years. He saved like crazy. And once we'd fixed the tax piece and the market piece, I told him he could comfortably spend more than he'd ever let himself spend in the past. And you know what he did? He kept clipping coupons. He drove to the second gas station to save 4 cents a gallon. He had the money, but he just couldn't physically turn it on. See, nobody tells you this part. 40 years of deferring and saving and saying, not yet, not yet. Those habits, they don't switch off. They die hard. Right? They don't switch off the day you retire. So the most common problem I see at this level isn't people overspending and running out. It's actually the opposite. People that have done a great job saving, living like they're still broke. In 31 years, I've never once had an 85-year-old tell me that they wish they spent less at 62. Not once. The regret always runs the other way. It's that trip that they kept putting off until their knees gave out, or the help they didn't give their kids until it was too late to matter, or that extra trip with their grandkids that they wish they had done. See, here's a question I want you to actually answer for yourself right now. If your portfolio dropped 40% tomorrow and stayed down for 3 years, could you still cover your basic living expenses without selling a thing? If the answer is yes, you've got more room than you're using. If no, that's not a reason to panic. That's the exact gap that the tax window was built to close. And either way, your account balance was never going to tell you that. With Frank, telling him wasn't going to be enough. I couldn't just tell him to spend more. A man who spent 30 years training himself not to touch the money, it doesn't flip a switch just because some guy told him to. His advisor. And I'll tell you in a minute what actually got him to change and whether he ever did. Because it wasn't a pep talk, and it's actually the same thing I'd set up for you. So the fourth conversation is around spending, and the fifth one is a little shorter and it's harder. And it's where I finally tell you what happened to both of those men. There are a couple of risks I make every family look at, even though nobody wants to. The first is long-term care. One long-term care event is big enough to affect even a $2 million plan to make it not work. And age 60 is when your options are still open and affordable. If you wait too long, those options, those affordable ideas, they start to go away. The second is harder, and it's what happens to the surviving spouse. When one partner passes, the household's income and its taxes both change, and usually not the way people expect. And that's exactly where Gerald's story turns. Remember him? We talked about him earlier. He's the relaxed one. Ruth and Gerald. Gerald was a retired hospital anesthesiologist. They had $3.1 million between them. On paper, Gerald and Ruth were doing great. Their plan was immaculate. They had great income. They had a good portfolio. They had a good CPA. They had an estate attorney, an investment guy. Every seat on the bus was filled. And by every benchmark he checked, they were fine. But here's what none of them had looked at. When Gerald passes away, Ruth goes from filing jointly to filing single. I call it the widow tax. It's the same income, but a much higher tax bracket. Her Medicare premiums jump up. And a big chunk of what they had built was sitting in exactly the wrong kind of account to hand to a surviving spouse. And the question always is, well, why did nobody catch it? And the reason is because nobody at the table had ever been in the same room. CPA handled the taxes. The attorney drew up the documents years ago and moved on. Investment advisors ran the accounts, and everyone had done their job pretty well, but not one was looking at what happens to Ruth the year after Gerald is gone. And unfortunately, Ruth was the one that had to pay for it. You see, that's the multiple six-figure problem that the relaxed man was sitting on. Gerald didn't have a bad investment. He had a coordination gap that nobody had ever looked for. And I admit I'm sort of a weirdo. I actually read these documents. I read tax returns, investment statements, all at the same time, so the whole picture lines up. Another question for you is, when was your last time your CPA and your financial advisor were actually in the same room, talking about your financial life and what you want to accomplish? And for most families, the answer is really never. And that gap is where that money leaks out. So that's how it turned out for Gerald, who was the relaxed one. Now, the scared one, Frank. Once Frank saw the window, that tax window I talked about, everything changed. He retired at 61. He spent those low income years converting at the lowest rates of his life and built that protected layer so a bad market couldn't force his hand and he didn't have to spend it. He didn't need 4 more years. He needed the 4 years he was already going to work. And he used those for a purpose now. And the spending, remember the man who couldn't turn it on? Frank just couldn't spend. What worked actually wasn't, like I said, a pep talk. We actually set up his account so a paycheck showed up in his checking every month, same as when he was working. And we named what each dollar was for. Some of it was for travel. Some of it was for grandkids. That truck he'd always wanted for a decade. You see, when the money comes in on its own and it already has a job, people spend it. When they have to sell something, they have to sell their stocks or bonds or mutual funds to do it, the old fear wins every time. A year in, Frank took the trip he'd been putting off for a decade. And he didn't lose a wink of sleep over it. When it all clicked, he looked at me and said, I've been scared of the wrong thing this whole time. I could have stopped working and retired years ago. You see, two men, the same 2 million. One of them was terrified and completely fine. The other felt ready and was walking toward a real problem. And neither difference was the market or the size of the account. It came down to whether anyone had actually looked at the entire picture. So the fifth conversation is protection. The last one is the shortest. And after 30 years, I've come to believe it actually matters more than the other 5 combined. See, none of the 5 conversations I just walked you through survive real life unless they live in one written plan that actually gets reviewed. A conversation that you had with someone once and forgot is not protection. A real plan tells you ahead of time what a market crash actually means to you. You work it out on paper when everyone's calm, not for the first time while it's happening. And that changes everything. Or you actually put your tax ideas on paper. The things you're going to implement in retirement to save money in taxes is on paper and reviewed, and they are strategies that we can put into place. This plan turns $2 million from a number that you worry about into income you can actually live on. You see, Frank and Gerald started with almost the same amount of money. The difference between them had nothing to do with the returns, and it wasn't luck. One of them had somebody put the whole picture together in time, and the other didn't, and it nearly cost them. Here's the one thing to do this week, and it really costs you nothing. Write down 2 numbers. The first is what you truly spend in a month, the real figure. And then the second one is what comes in guaranteed every month, no matter what the market does. So that would be Social Security, pension, rental income, whatever it might be. And the gap between those two is the only number that matters. It's what your portfolio actually has to cover, and it tells you more than your account balance ever will. You see, the families who thrive, they didn't get better markets or start with more. They just had these conversations early before the window closed. Okay, so now you've heard the 6 conversations that I have with every $2 million client at age 60. Where you actually stand, the tax window, that one risk we talked about, the spending practices, the protection, and the plan is what holds it all together. And so if you'd like to have these conversations about your own numbers, feel free to click the number below to book a call with me and my team. I'll tell you, I really like making these videos. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.